In homes, offices and public buildings, for interiors and exteriors, Fidenza Vetro Arredo's high-quality glass bricks can be used today with beautiful results. A lot depends on the imagination of the designer, who has to decide how and where to place Vetro Arredo's walls, surfaces and decorations to their best effect. But a great deal also depends on the skill of the craftsman who follows the design, using his expertise and his knowledge of the specific methods for laying glass bricks. This film gives a thorough explanation of the 4 techniques used for prefabricated internal wall panels, prefabricated flooring, walls to be assembled vertically using wooden spacers, walls to be assembled vertically using standard plastic spacers. In our first example, we will look at how to assemble a prefabricated panel for internal walls. We will be using pink, aquamarine and colorless transparent DO glass bricks with a wavy inside surface, measuring 24 by 24 by 8 centimeters. Using a steel rule to keep a straight line, you position each individual glass brick inside a grid previously drawn on the ground. The grid is used to determine the horizontal and vertical positions of the bricks and therefore the exact space between them. Next, 4 metal or wooden rods are positioned and fixed around the perimeter. These rods are used both to determine the width of the outer edge of the panel, in this case 3 centimeters, and to hold the mortar. At this point, we have the outline of the panel. The next task is to fix it and make it ready for use. To begin with, you have to fix the position of the bricks in order to prevent them moving during the prefabrication. To do this, you pour extremely liquid plaster into the spaces between the bricks and around the outside frame. This will dry in 20 to 30 minutes, allowing you to continue with the mortar casting. First, you carefully pour the mortar into the spaces between the bricks and around the outer edge to a depth of 3 to 4 centimeters. In this case, the mortar is a mixture of R325 white cement, grit, and white powdered marble. Reinforcing milled steel rods with a diameter of 6 millimeters are then placed in the center line between the bricks, making sure that they are short enough to leave a gap of at least 2 centimeters between the end of the rods and the edge of the panel, and along the outside edges, both horizontally and vertically. At the same time, you place 4 pieces of reinforced iron on the 2 opposite sides of the frame, 2 on each side at 1/3 and 2/3 of their length. These wall hooks can be used to carry the wall and later to anchor it. They are placed on the outside of the frame and are marked with pieces of cardboard, which will be used to identify their position when the work is finished. Mortar is again poured into the appropriate areas, taking care to prevent air bubbles from forming by continually inserting a trowel in the spaces. Now you remove any protective plastic covering and wait for a few hours for the mortar to dry. Excess material is then removed with a palette knife and wood shavings. The last phase is to finish the panel. This is done with a new casting of liquid plaster and white cement, spread with a soft-edged trowel. The surface is now repeatedly sprinkled with sand to absorb any remaining dampness. Once the plaster has solidified, the surface is again cleaned with wood shavings. The outside frame is removed, and using the pieces of cardboard as your markers, the wall hooks are uncovered. These can now be used to carry the panel and to anchor it when it is installed. "24 hours later, the panel can be turned over and the other side finished, after which it is ready to be mounted. Assembling prefabricated flooring is in many ways similar to the process we have just seen. We are going to see a 110 by 110 centimeter skylight being prepared using 3020M glass bricks measuring 20 by 20 by 7 centimeters. Using a metal rule, each single glass brick is placed inside a grid previously drawn on the worktop to outline their vertical and horizontal positions. The grid is also used to determine the exact space between them, which for floors must by law be no less than 3 centimeters. Four metal or wooden bars are fixed around the perimeter, in this case using simple vices. These serve to determine the width of the outside edge and to hold the concrete casting. The outline of the finished panel has now been determined. Quick-drying liquid plaster is now poured in between the spaces and around the outside edge to ensure that the glass bricks remain fixed during prefabrication. When the plaster has solidified, proceed to the first concrete casting using R325 or R425 cement. The first layer must be extremely liquid, the next more consistent, and so on up to a thickness of 3 to 4 centimeters. At this point, reinforcing iron rods of 6 to 8 millimeters in diameter are placed in the center line between the bricks and along the outside edges. The 8 millimeter rods are placed horizontally, while the 6 millimeter rods are placed vertically. All the rods should be cut so as to leave a gap of at least 2 centimeters between the end of the rod and the edge of the panel. Now you add plaster up to the level of the glass bricks. Then the panel is reinforced again, this time putting the 6 millimeter rods horizontally and the 8 millimeter rods vertically. The rods are allowed to settle and then lightly pushed into the plaster. The panel is then covered with sand and left for a few hours to dry. Next, Excess material is removed using a palette knife and wood shavings. The panel is finished by pouring in more liquid plaster until all the intermediate spaces are perfectly filled. Then, using a fine sieve, you sprinkle sand over the entire surface to absorb any remaining dampness. This last procedure can be repeated various times. Wood shavings are used for a final cleanup. When the plaster has solidified completely, the external frame can be removed. Due to the small size of the panel we have seen here, it doesn't need the wall hooks either to carry it or to anchor it to the ceiling. This example, on the other hand, will need to be carried by a machine and has been fitted with metal rings for this purpose, even though it will not be anchored during installation. Finally, we can move on to the vertical construction of an internal, slightly curving wall using Fidenza vetro arredo plastic spacers to obtain a 1 centimeter space between all the bricks. The shape of the wall has already been outlined by 2 metallic U-shaped uprights placed at both ends. The inside of the upright is covered with 6 to 7 millimeters of an insulating material, such as isopav. This will absorb any future expansion or settling. Tabs are welded inside the upright and 8 millimeter milled steel rods are now secured to them. After this preparatory phase, the real work begins. The first row of bricks is laid, placing the plastic spacers between one brick and the next to ensure perfect vertical and horizontal alignment. Now that the bricks are in position, you can apply the mortar. R325 concrete, made up in 300 kilo batches, carefully filling all the spaces. Notice that the spacers can be placed in 2 positions. It is in fact necessary to alternate them to give support to the horizontal reinforcing rod, so preventing it from coming into contact with and possibly damaging the glass bricks. Other than the 6 millimeter rod, 2 curved 4 millimeter anchoring rods are placed at each end of the wall, hooked to the rods which were fixed to the uprights during the preparatory phase. You now fill the spaces with plaster and continue with the second and then the third row in the same way. The horizontal reinforcing rods are used on every other row until the wall has been completed. When the third row has been laid, 8 millimeter vertical rods are inserted in the middle of the space. The wall is then completed and the top part closed with an insulating material like that used on the inside of the uprights, again to protect the wall from possible future expansion. When the mortar has solidified, the parts of the spacers that still stick out are broken off using the handle of a hammer. The wall can now be cleaned and finished. One last detail. In this example, the corner is a prefabricated panel, and we can see how the angle lines have been used to anchor it into position. You have been able to see Vetro-Arredo's practical and visual appeal. Not only does its transparency allow light to pass through and so add a great deal to the surface itself and the spaces it defines, but it also fits in easily with a whole range of other materials and architectural styles, being perfectly at home on an elegant marble floor or next to a technological structure in butter-finished steel, or alongside warm, traditional brickwork. If it is planned with care and correctly installed, Vetro-Arredo is among the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art